If you would have told me just a couple years ago that not only is Blackluster Soldier at 3 copies per deck, but also basically every single competitive strategy isn't even considering playing the card, I probably wouldn't believe you. If you go back and look at even the 2014 deck list of Shadal's and Burning Abyss, both decks that were playing Blackluster Soldier, there are plenty of deck profiles where people say that Blackluster Soldier should probably be banned, even in that format. And I mentioned Duelist Alliance specifically. Obviously, BLS was good before that, but I mentioned that format specifically because in a lot of the videos that I talk about, I mentioned that when Duelist Alliance dropped, the game changed a ton. And yes, it's true that I've been procrastinating the Duelist Alliance video. Someday I'll get around to it. That'll be like the white whale of this channel. But besides all that, even though the game changed in many ways, Blackluster Soldier continued to be a threat for long after that, right up until a couple years ago. And at the moment, it is unlimited, and basically no deck is playing it. And I say basically because, yes, there are some decks that are playing it, most notably the recent Burning Abyss deck that won the European National Tournament played BLS. I think it played 2 of them, maybe it played 3 of them, I'm not quite sure, but it played the card for sure. And other than that, though, pretty much no one is playing the card competitively, which is just like crazy. Like, BLS is like such a good boss monster. Like, it's better than most of the boss monsters out there, even in modern standards, and yet people aren't playing it. I think of cards like Judgment Dragon, which even in the more pure Lightsworn variants isn't really being played anymore just because it's a brick. And that's kind of the same thing with BLS. It's not good going first. Cards like Dark Dragon definitely can come back at 3 copies per deck simply because they're not good going first. And that might sound crazy, and it is crazy. It's crazy that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has gotten to the point where you can have these crazy, ridiculous boss monsters like BLS, like Judgment Dragon, like Dark Dragon, and they don't do anything in the metagame because they're not good going first. If you look at a card, it's not that like every card has to be good going first. It's just if it's a card designed to not go first, it has to be really, really easy to activate and also really high impact. Think of cards like Twin Twisters on the low end of the spectrum, which are really good going second. They sort of break your opponent's back row. But on the high end of the spectrum, you have cards like Evenly Match, which can just blow out a game entirely, and it's almost just like a 1-card win condition. How are things like BLS and Judgment Dragon and Dark Dragon supposed to compete with cards like that, which you can just activate immediately and do a whole bunch of damage with, as far as damaging the board, not direct damage because they're not monsters? How can these old school boss monsters actually compete with those cards? The fact of the matter is, they're not. That's why BLS isn't being played. It's crazy, yes, because BLS is a hugely influential monster on the Yu-Gi-Oh! As a whole. It was pretty much the golden standard for what a boss monster should be. It's really not that hard to summon. Compared to like Dark Dragon, which requires you to have exactly 3 darks in graveyard, BLS just takes 1 light and 1 dark, and you can have as many other cards in your graveyard as you want. That's really not that hard to summon, and I mean, it's way easier than like Judgment Dragon even though Judgment Dragon may have seen more play recently than BLS. I think that BLS is just a better card overall in terms of design, in terms of impact, all those sorts of things. It's a card that can control the board by banishing things. It's a card that can just attack over a bunch of things for game. It's a card that's extremely versatile. However, it's not good going first, and that's the biggest problem with it, because if you're playing modern Yu-Gi-Oh! You're doing one of 2 things. You're playing a going first strategy, or you're playing a going second strategy that really wants to take advantage of having 6 cards and playing the really high impact cards like Evenly Matched, like Hand Traps, like Twin Twisters. And BLS and Judgment Dragon and Dark Dragon, they don't fit into either of those categories, therefore they're not really going to be played. In a Lightsworn deck, you want to go first and create a huge board and set up your graveyard for Fairy Tale Snow. You're not so concerned with summoning Judgment Dragon, even going first, even going second. It doesn't really matter. That's not part of your strategy. You're trying to make a whole board of Links and Exceed monsters and Synchro monsters. Judgment Dragon is just a brick. It's not a starter card. If we look at BLS, even in that Burning Abyss deck list, the reason that we haven't seen BLS played in every Burning Abyss deck list is simply because it's not a card that gets you to Dante. It's not a card that gets you to Beatrice when you go first or second, and that's pretty important. Now, the reason that BLS and the reason that some of these cards eventually do see play, even in a modern format, even in 2018, and likely in 2019, just in like rogue strategies, is because if the whole format devolves to no one using boss monsters, then big boss monsters like BLS have the potential to steal games. I think we saw exactly that happen at that European Nationals, only because BLS is like bigger than almost all the cards in the Sky Striker Trickstar deck. The only real good out to it is stopping it before it gets summoned with like Trickstar Reincarnation, but it's an inherent summon, so they'd have to do that preemptively, so that'd be kind of tricky. With the main out is Borolo Dragon, and that's not even that good of out. It requires him to have the Scapegoat, and for you not to like Farfo one of the Link monsters and prevent them from making the Borreload. It prevents your opponent, or it makes your opponent have to do a lot of things, otherwise you're just going to beat their face in with BLS. And I think that's really cool that it just happened to be a really good metagame call for that tournament. Now, I don't know that boss monsters are going to be gone forever. We certainly have seen some recent boss monsters. I think the best examples, if we're strictly talking about main deck boss monsters, because I mean, we can talk about like ABC Dragon Buster. Obviously the card is insane, but it's a little different when you're trying to compare a card you don't have to draw like ABC Dragon Buster to cards that you do have to draw, because the ones that you do have to draw have a much higher chance of becoming bricks simply because there are bricks. Like you don't have to worry about drawing the fusion card because it's just in your extra deck. Where with the main deck cards, you actually have to worry about drawing them in your opening hands when they're not good, as well as have them sometimes when they are good, but in a lot of cases you just have them when they're not useful. But are there boss monsters in the modern format? Sure. Masterpiece just got banned. That card was probably one of the best examples of a strong boss monster. Maybe poorly designed, but strong nevertheless. It's a card that not only has a protection effect, which is really important, but also gains advantage every single turn. Every time you take a turn, blow up an opponent's card. Every time your opponent takes a turn, blow up another card. A lot of people keep asking me, could Masterpiece come back? Is the card too good? Is the card not good enough for this format? A lot of people are just having mixed opinions. Obviously, it can be outed by a kaiju, and what I keep telling people is that the reason Masterpiece was so good, and this is something to really think about when we compare to cards like BLS and Judgment Dragon, the reason Masterpiece was so good was not only because it was good going first, but because it actually gained advantage. It didn't just have that protection effect, and it also was fairly easy to summon, even as a main deck monster. If you compare Masterpiece to all the other sort of monsters that have those protection effects, if you look at Cliffort Towers, if you look at the Super Quantum Exceed monster, if you look at the Raid Raptor Exceed monster, why is Masterpiece the one that saw so much play? It's because it gives you value, so every single turn it's alive, you're blowing up cards, so when your opponent eventually does out the card, which they usually do, eventually they'll probably draw like a Gamma Seal or something, when they eventually do out the card, they've lost like 6 cards, so you're just going to win anyway. And that's something that many of those sort of towers-like cards, like Cliffort Towers and all those ones that are unaffected by stuff, even though they have a lot of attack points, if they're not actually gaining advantage, it doesn't really matter, because that really puts you as the player on a really tight clock. You basically need to kill your opponent as fast as possible after summoning those monsters, just to make sure your opponent doesn't out it and you lose your whole setup. That's why Masterpiece was so good. It was not only because it was easy to summon, but also because it was blowing up cards every single turn. But the other example that I can think of, and one that I think is fair enough, because it's at 3 right now, is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. I love playing dinosaurs. I think you guys know that by now. I feel like I've been playing them for like 2 weeks straight on all the different live streams. That's like 10 hours worth of dinosaur playing, and Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is a perfect example of a card that is a boss monster. It's a main deck boss monster. It is potentially a brick, but it actually makes up for that in the sheer value that it gets you all beyond the board. Now, it doesn't technically gain you advantage when you go first. It just sort of disrupts your opponent, but it's a card that's really cool because when you go first, your Conductor can be a way to disrupt your opponent's plays by flipping their guys face down, but when you go second, or even after your first turn and you're now on turn 2 so you can attack, it actually lets you break your opponent's board. So it's a card that not only can prevent your opponent from making a board, but also has the potential to break that board if they do get a chance to actually make those, especially if you're going second. And that makes Ultimate Conductor Tyranno much better than cards like BLS and cards like Judgment Dragon, because it's good going first and second, something that Masterpiece shares as well. But a lot of sort of modern boss monsters that I think about, or even if we look at BLS, which is now at 3, even though it's not a modern card, it is a card that's at 3 that you could play. The problem with it is that it's only good going second. It's only good when you have a graveyard set up. It's not so good when you're going first. And if you're going first and you draw BLS, you're basically playing with a 4-card hand, which is not the case with Masterpiece, which is not the case with Conductor Tyranno. Anyway, though, do I think boss monsters are dead? No, I think Konami will continue to print good boss monsters. Now, many of them are going into the extra decks, but in this video, I just want to talk about the main focus on the main deck monsters, not so much the extra deck ones, because there's very different dynamics going on with those two types of boss monsters. But let me know what you think about boss monsters. Let me know what you think about the two most recent examples, the Conductor, Tyranno, and Masterpiece. Are they too good for boss monsters? Should they be worse? If they were worse, would they have seen any play? I'm not so sure, but I want to know your thoughts. Put them down in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.